Hi, my name is Tong, and today you've asked me to reflect on the company Got Bag by answering the two questions. Why does Got Bag not want to make clothes and just backpacks, and who should be responsible for a product at the end of its useful life, the producer or the consumer? So, starting with the first question, the reason given in the case is that it releases microfabrics when washed, clothing that is, and you wouldn't really wash backpacks. So since this does happen, then it kind of goes against what they're trying to do, because they're trying to reduce the environmental impact of plastics, right? And if their clothes are releasing microplastics, then that's counterintuitive. Other reasons could include the current trend of fast fashion. So lots of people they buy tons and tons of clothes, and then after only wearing them for a year or two, they'll throw them away. Since there are so many clothes and each one is so insignificant, they're not worth that much, people can't really be bothered to recycle it, and these clothes often end up back into the ocean, trash dumps, or incinerated, which breaks the whole idea of circular economy they're trying to create, and it doesn't actually solve the problem that they're trying to solve. Another thing is that clothes are usually sold for incredibly cheap prices, which may not be sustainable for the company depending on the cost of the technology they're using. So what they're doing is they're getting plastics out of the ocean, turning them into yarn, and then like sewing clothes, right? That is quite a process, and I imagine it's pretty expensive compared to other clothing companies who lots of the times are trying to pump out as many clothes as quickly and as cheaply as they can, and Gotbag just wouldn't be able to compete with them, and they wouldn't actually sell many of their clothes or like take up much of the market. So it's not solving the issue because people are just still buying these clothes from these unsustainable sources. With backpacks, they're not often thrown out. Each backpack is often used for years and years because it's not a fashion item and it doesn't get worn out really easily, but it's rather a tool. Um, then there's the idea that a lot of customers would be concerned about wearing like ocean plastic on their bodies if it's clothes, because of the general attitude towards garbage. Now, yeah, I would assume that there's some extensive cleaning procedures and that's not an issue, but people would still be concerned, right? And since it does release microplastic when it's washed, you would probably imagine that it probably isn't the most healthy thing to be wearing plastic, right? But backpacks, they're an accessory that doesn't directly contact the user. You like have it on your back. So that's not an issue. Now, as for who should be responsible for a product at the end of its useful life, I think neither the producer or the consumer's responsibility. And let's start with analyzing the consumer's role, right? So consumers, if we're saying that it should be their responsibility. The idea is they can choose to reuse like products that they buy, or make sure what they're using is getting recycled properly, in their blue bins, or like compost in their green bins, things like that. But there's just so many things that people buy that aren't recyclable, and clothing is a pretty huge one. You can't just put your clothes in the recycling bin, and clothes are worn. They can't really be reused because they get worn out, and like kids will grow out of them, right? They got worn out like pretty quickly, and even if you are like reusing it within the family, it's like some people just like don't like that, right? Somebody else's used clothes aren't something that they necessarily want for the average consumer, and so people often just throw them out. The people who actually donated clothing. It's a kind of a complicated issue, and it doesn't really just not all of it goes to people in need. They often are bought by big companies and shipped to like third world countries and then sold for a much lower price there. But at the same time, like these clothes aren't in the best of quality, and they just simply get burned when they are when they can't be sold, and that's a pretty big issue because of the environmental pollution it creates. So yeah, like even if the consumer tries their best in terms of things like clothes, it's not really gonna work out that well. Other than that, a lot of people don't have the choice to buy sustainable products because they're often more expensive. It's just hard to convince people to spend more on something that is of the same or oftentimes sometimes even worse quality. Besides that, the individual impact of consumers, like one consumer deciding to just go all out sustainable, doesn't really have, its impact is rather imperceptible. It's way too hard to convince every consumer to do something, especially when it involves buying something at a higher price. Honestly, when we make it the responsibility of consumers to take care of a product that it's at the end of its life, it's kind of a trick by companies to avoid accountability by pushing it off to someone else because of this impact, how small it is of consumers, whereas companies, like one oil spill has a much more significant impact than anything one person or even like a lot of people, like they don't have that kind of impact, right? Now, at the same time, it doesn't really make sense for a company to be responsible for its own products either, because a company's purpose isn't to recycle things, right? If they're selling clothes, they're trying to sell clothes. They're like, that's like recycling and similar things like that. It's a whole industry, and oftentimes, at least in Canada, it's run by the government, right? So a company shouldn't have to create an entirely new department and invest a lot of time and money in developing recyclable products or ways to recycle the products that they've already made, or have to overhaul their existing products because they're inevitably going to have to take a loss on that. It always takes resources to recycle something, and they're going to have to increase the price or be willing to incur the loss. And if they increase the price, then what's the incentive for customers to buy that, right? There's no point in buying a recycled product for more than a brand new product. So in the end, I think it should be the government's responsibility. Oh, before I get to that, I forgot to mention, but while like I say it's ridiculous for companies to have to like recycle all their products, there is a case to be made for preventing companies from just making everything planned obsolescence, right? With tech companies right now, lots of they come up with new products and their old products just become obsolete and you have to switch it. Now, it does make sense to try to prevent that, especially with currently lots of phones and things like that. You can't switch the batteries. And so once the battery dies, that one small part doesn't work anymore. You have to throw out the entire thing. And so as I was saying, I think it's up to the government, right? They should make these regulations to reduce the impact that things like planned obsolescence has, and they should take a bigger initiative to try and cover these issues like plastic in the water, and yeah, because they have the power to do this. So in summation, a got bag probably doesn't want to manufacture clothing because it just goes against what they're trying to do because of the nature of the clothing industry in general, and the responsibility of disposing or recycling a product shouldn't be on the consumer because they just don't have the impact and the power, and neither should it be on the company because it's not their purpose, and we shouldn't have to force these companies to take a loss, but to a certain extent. So I think it's the government's responsibility. Thank you so much.